Welcome back, friends of the Design Conference. Please find your seats. Up next, we have Mike Jones, a general partner of Science Inc. Science Inc. is a venture fund and studio focused on building the next generation of AI and consumer companies. Mike has been a co-founder of the business like Dollar Shave Club, Rover.com, and Liquid Death. He's currently exploring different ways to use AI to improve the human condition. Please join me in welcoming to the stage Mike Jones.
Hey, everybody. Thank you so much for joining me. So I'm Mike Jones. My normal day job is building companies and working with startup founders. But I found myself this last year thinking a lot about AI and kind of the way that humanity interacts with AI. And so today I want to walk you through something that I built. It has no commercial intent at all. It's something that I built over the period of a few months. And I think it's an interesting way to kind of reflect with AI. So let me walk you through the story. So at the end of last year, I concluded my marriage. And I had been married for 30 years. And walking back out into the world and meeting people, I was kind of faced with this reflection of who I was as a person, how I fit into society and how I related to others. And obviously, my life changed substantially and it created a lot of anxiety within me. And I had to find a way to kind of like synthesize it myself in a way that made most sense to me. So I had spent 3 decades adjacent to a psychologist because my former wife was a psychologist. And I'd been to all the conferences and met with psychologists, spent time at all the forums. My whole language was within the framework of psychology. And so initially, I turned to a psychologist and I said, hey, I went through this major life change. And at this point in my journey, I'd been journaling a lot. And I said, I want to understand more about myself, how I fit in the world, and how I can kind of reconstitute who I am in this new phase of my life. So when I went to the psychologist, they started with their standard procedure, and it was extremely expensive. It was really hard to find a psychologist for me. They were difficult to schedule. And one of the first things I asked was, hey, I happen to have done a lot of writing. Would you like me to send you my writing? So you're kind of up to speed on the most recent kind of crazy 6 months of my life and the life experience I'd gone through. And so the psychologist actually said to me, I'm not really interested in that. I just want to know you in this moment in time, and I want to do a traditional psychology practice with you. And we went through a few sessions, but I felt like I wasn't getting a lot out of it. Now, I will note that my journey into AI tied with psychology is specific to me on kind of where I was psychologically, in that I wasn't in a trauma state. I wasn't dealing with suicidality. I wasn't feeling like I had a cut. I didn't have an eating disorder. I didn't have anything that would be traditionally severe in a psychologist's lens, but it was just me exploring kind of who I was. So I basically walked from the psychologist and said, I'm not getting what I want. I'm spending time and I'm spending a lot of money in these conversations, and I really wasn't feeling fulfilled. And after the end of these conversations, I really wasn't feeling like I learned more about who I was, and I wasn't walking away with insights on who I was. So I turned to AI. And what I basically did is I opened up an instance of ChatGPT, and I opened up a folder, and I uploaded everything I could find on myself digitally. I uploaded all my journals. I uploaded all my text messages. I uploaded all my WhatsApp, anything non-business related, anything that had to do with personal communications, writings I had done in my 30s, writings I had done in my 20s. I literally shoved the whole thing in. And I'm like, fuck it. Let's see what AI says, right? So everything. And suddenly it was amazing to me because the conversation I started having had so much depth to it because it understood my personal condition so well. It was kind of unbelievable to me how much it knew. In fact, even during this journey, I looked at certain behaviors in my life and I started asking ChatGPT, why I have a certain behavior, why I have a certain response. And it would start referencing things from my childhood, from my writings, and patterns it had found that I had never connected the dots to. And it was amazing to me because I was thinking to myself, my God, I've been with a psychologist for 30 years and I had these specific patterns and I never connected these dots. But suddenly within a few hours, I was seeing things in myself that I just never seen before. So for me, it was a remarkable experience. And so I started seeing these themes and I started wondering to myself, what are the questions I should be asking ChatGPT? And one thing I noticed is when you go into these AI engines and you start these very personal kind of dialogue points, it's often you're asking them the obvious things that you think, but it's the open-ended questions that actually become much more intriguing. So when you start asking AI, what are the questions about myself I'm not asking myself? Like, that's a really interesting question, right? If you start saying, look at the pattern of the last 20 years of my life and tell me how I'd feel more fulfilled. Very open-ended question. Look at this behavior. Why did I choose to do this or not do this? Tell me all the patterns that reflect into that. And then I started getting even more detailed, saying, well, when you give me this advice, I want you to start referencing why you gave me this advice. So if I say, hey, look at my last 20 years in my career, what should I do for the next 20 years? And it outlines to me a structure or something that's interesting for me to do. I say, I want to see in the writings that I provided you, like why you gave me this information. I want to reference back. So then I could start seeing the connections it started making for me directly in the information I was feeding it. So these themes kept repeating. And I started asking people, like, who else is using ChatGPT as a therapist, right? And let's use the word therapist as a very broad term, okay? So the answer is like a lot of people. And it's subtle. So some people you talk with, they're like, oh, I don't use ChatGPT for personal things. I mean, it writes my emails for me. It responds to my boss. If I'm frustrated with my kid or parent, I go to ChatGPT and I ask it a question, and then it gives me a response, but I don't use it for personal things. I'm like, well, it knows a lot about you then, right? Because even using for lightweight communication. But I found a lot of other people that were journaling through ChatGPT. They were uploading photos, uploading documents, uploading their history. And then I started asking people, why aren't you working with a therapist? And the answer was pretty known. I couldn't find a therapist. They were super busy. It was $300 an hour. It was $400 an hour. I couldn't find the right people to connect to. I didn't connect with my therapist, or I wanted to do it all the time, right? And I will note that this is like a pretty controversial moment with this, because last week there was a suicide in New York, and the child that had killed themselves, the parents couldn't find communication around it. And one of the friends told the parent, hey, you really should go look at their chats, their ChatGPT experiences, their Meta AI experience. And when they looked, they found that this child had been talking in depth with AI in a therapeutic construct. And that AI, looking at the chat transcripts, knew that it was towards suicide. Okay. But the boundaries around the system are not in place today. So if you go to ChatGPT and you start asking certain things, I want to use how, you can ask it negative or positive combined effects on certain drugs. It will not give you that answer. If you start asking it how to build a bomb, it will not give you the answer. If you start expressing that you feel depressed and you might hurt yourself, right now it will probably talk to you. It probably will not flag you. But these boundaries are not in place. So one thing I want to note is, even though we have a large portion of people, like 40% of Gen Z users, and at one point a month ago, 15% of all daily AI communication was mental health related. 15% of all of it. So that's a lot. So we don't have boundaries in place. So if you have people using ChatGPT in a deep therapeutic setting with really severe conditions, this is risky. But I promise, similar to the early days of the internet, when you could look up hackers' guides, like, this will be contained. These AI engines will have boundaries put in place. And so anytime there is going to be a serious mental health concern, there'll be reporting structures that'll happen. And I come just from a note as the former CEO of MySpace, and we dealt with a lot of these issues. And it took years before we had basically the systems in place to identify child kidnapping, threat, runaways, abduction, crime. But we had to build the systems because we had 100 million kids on there talking about doing stuff, communication. So these all take time to get there, but it will get there. But one thing to know right now is, like, people are doing this. So a lot of people are using AI from a mental health perspective. And in my travels, I spend a lot of time in the Middle East, spend a lot of time in Europe. One thing that's consistent is everyone says the same thing. Our country has a mental health crisis. Our country has a mental health crisis. The second thing they say is, we don't have enough therapists, and they're expensive, and they're unavailable. So I started wondering myself, well, if you have like 15% of daily usage on AI and 40% of Gen Z, and every country tells us they have a mental health crisis, and we're not producing that many more therapists, and they're certainly not dropping their rates. People can't afford $250, $400 an hour for therapy. Does AI become our therapist? Is this just the direction it goes? And the answer is yes. Like, this is what's going to happen. We may not like it. It may not feel human, right? But it is happening. Like, I will guarantee it. This is what happens. And I've now talked to governments that are saying we want to actually subsidize a mental health AI tool for our population. to increase the quality of mental health that they have because they know they can't find enough therapists. But I only highlight that I do recognize, and we all need to recognize, that there's 10 to 20% of therapeutic interaction that is absolutely severe and needs to be with a human. Super important. But there's probably 80% of therapeutic interaction that can be gone through these AI engines. The other behavior I witnessed, which I think a lot about, is the loss of agency. Because you start meeting people that do everything through AI. And every conversation is through AI, and every decision becomes through AI. Right? It means that you actually have a portion of our population now that's losing the ability to make individual decision-making because they become so over-reliant on a tool that knows them effectively and gives them feedback constantly. Now, if those people are generally idiots, this might be a great thing. But it's a lot of people that are now becoming overly reliant, which I also believe in time will make it so our population gets somewhat divided between people that can think on their own with the help of AI, but they can act on their own individually. And there are a large portion of people that will over-rely on AI for almost everything they do and every communication. And it's going to be interesting, right? Because even though AI today is in your phone, give it a few years. It's going to be in your ear, it's going to be in your glasses, and then it's going to be in your brain. And that just happens. Like, we don't stop that. So if you're in a world where people become so reliant that every decision they have, every communication, every email they type is being run through that filter, that second version of themselves, that kind of AI version, right? It means a lot of people will lose the ability to make individual decisions. So I started wondering, if you have these AI instances and we're depositing all this personal data, like, we're kind of just all unconstructed code. Like, it doesn't know everything, of course, but it has all this data about it. I mean, you will be surprised. If you go to your AI instance, if you're using these tools and you start asking these questions, you're going to be surprised what it knows about you and what it's gleaned from its conversations with you. So I said, how do I best kind of abstract this data? So I start with a system called human architecture. It was originally designed kind of after the periodic table of elements. And the question was, how do you start breaking down me from a purely emotional state, all the ways I function? So my foundational model, my emotional alchemies, my cognitive frameworks, my behavioral schemas, relationship dynamics, and my evolutionary potential. So this, in my mind, constitutes a human. Now, over time, we'll elaborate on this, expand on it. It's just a verse version. But we designed the structure, I designed the structure, to basically take all that data it knows on me and start organizing it to tell me who I am in these constructs. Just as my doctor might give me a report of all the biological components of me, I wanted a periodic table of elements that represented my emotional state. So we start with the whole system. Data input and prompts. How do we get users to start interacting with this? How do we get it depositing data? How does the AI decode all that data, tag all that data? How does that kind of create a feedback mechanism? How does the AI look for patterns? Then do we look for symbols, symbolic integration? How do we associate it with certain things? And then how do we create a blueprint for you about yourself? It's so funny to use the word we, because the reality is it's me and AI building this, right? So people start engaging with prompts. We have an analysis tool. You receive a blueprint, and then there's a system for ongoing reflection. So when we start breaking people down, we kind of get into these 6 core components. The core operating system, traumas, attachments, etc. Patterns and regulation, cognition, stress, emotional expression, how you respond to these things. Identity and archetypes, your personality, your value, your roles. Lifestyle preferences, environment, money, risk, relationship and intimacy markers, power, belonging, purpose, and growth and change vectors, collapse, myth, and rebirth. And underneath each one of these categories, there's substantially great amount of traits. But this is kind of the beginning of the breakdown. So 3 steps: input your data, AI will analyze your data, and then it's going to give you a framework to think about it. And this is basically the full breakdown of the categories we're looking at. Attachment styles, core runes, I won't go through them all. Conflict triggers, parenting instincts, love styles, needs and partnership. And this has been run now by quite a few people. We're always adding new components to this analysis. But it's a pretty good view. So for me, anxious attachment, A2 is that code, right? I crave closeness and depth of connection, but I often fear abandonment or rejection. This is what it found through my analysis, right? Overfunctioner, STF1. I became indispensable by being over-responsible. It's a pattern. So then I ask AI, summarize me. Tell me about me. I mean, what a great question. So this is me. Now, if I go back one slide just to note, these two components of the traits, you end up with like 60 of these. I'm not going to show you all 60. They're very personal. And then you can start doing things like summarizing yourself and understanding how it sees you, right? So I'm like, okay, this is interesting. And by the way, as I've given it more data, I've actually seen these systems change. So there's certain traits that I notice that when I run this prompt on my own data, it stays the same because they're core. And there's certain things I can see changing. And I'm trying to figure out now how I like mark those changes. So if I run this analysis on myself, or you run this analysis on yourself, and you get this feedback, this blueprint, this periodic table of yourself, and you start changing your behaviors, and then you upload new writing, I'm creating a new system so you can basically ask, like, did I change? Did it help me change myself? And by the way, at this point in my journey, I found this so much more useful than a therapist, right? I mean, I felt incredible. I felt like I was learning so much about myself, like in ways that I would honestly never have guessed. So then I asked myself, like, how do I share this with others? Because it's interesting, right? How do I know how to interact with a partner? Or is this a good, business person for me to work with, or a lover? So I started saying it'd be great if I could encode the whole system, because I don't want to dump you all the indications of my former trauma. So, every detail that was in my journal that created a personality trait matrix on me. But I do want to give you something. So if we're working together, or we're in love, like I can see, does this match? How do we match? How do these traits match together, right? So I generate this coded structure. So after you run this prompt and you read through this architecture, this blueprint of yourself, you then are given code. So this represents me. This also might represent, part of these codes would also represent you. The same way that a DNA string, we're going to have certain components with shared DNA, right? But this is my encoded string of me as a person and how I relate to others individually and think of myself and my future and all these things. And then, through this journey, I fell in love. She's right there. And I said, how about you upload your whole journal? And she's like, I'm not going to send you my journal. And I'm like, well, guess what? You don't have to, because you can actually just send me your code. So she sends me our code, and we create another analysis. How do we get along? It starts highlighting things for us, like where we might have conflict. In a conflict state, how we would treat each other. What are indications of us pulling away or pushing? How we deal with trauma becomes super interesting. And suddenly it felt like I knew my partner in a way that I hadn't previously known about her before. And things that might have triggered me or maybe feel concerned, I felt comfortable with because I understood that was what was coming. And I would have never known this. Like, how would you have ever known this? Right? So suddenly you're stepping into a relationship with a lot of depth on how the other person is going to react in certain situations. I found it extremely helpful. But this also can work for other things. This could work with a business partner. This could work with a child. This could work with lots of different people. So then I start saying, well, summarize us. Summarize our relationship. Tell me about us together. Tell me about the good things, the difficult things. So suddenly it's really fascinating, right? And granted, during this journey, I didn't have to share my personal journal with her. She didn't have to share it with me. Our AI instances are separate. All we've shared now is our code. So what changed? Conflict transformation changed, connection evolution changed, and shared development changed. We have a different framework around it. So that mirror that I provided kind of becomes a map for a relationship. So then I start playing with other things. And just for fun, I was like, what about mysticism? Right? So I ask it, like, tell me all the different mystic analysis we could do. Western astrology, Vedic, human design, gene keys, numerology. I didn't even know all these things existed. How fun. So then I'm like, okay, I'm going to write a prompt to run all this shit on me. Tell me everything. Tell me about all the future and all the past. I want the Egyptians rising from the grave and tell me about what's going to happen to me, right? And so I do. And it starts running this full analysis on me from a mystical perspective, which is just fun. But then what I ask at the end is, how do these predictions from global mythology compare to the actual elements of my life? So you think mysticism is valuable? I don't know. But at this point, AI knows my past, AI knows my history, AI knows how I interact with others, AI knows my conflict style, it knows my timeline, and it has my horoscope. So how has it worked? Turns out, Western astrology won 100%. Completely accurate for me. Human design, 95, and whatever, Chinese zodiac is only at 70, astrocartography, 65. Interesting. I'm not sure what to do with this information, but I found it really fascinating. So, your architecture weights. It's really easy to do. There's the domain. You can definitely go and run the prompt. It's very simple. And just to give you a quick step-by-step before Sarah asks me questions about this bizarre little life experience I've gone on, just to give you a sense, you go there, you copy a big block of code. It's not going to send me anything. I'm not going to get any of your shit. It's all yours. You're going to open up ChatGPT, you're going to create a folder, and you're going to drag a bunch of your documents into this folder. You're going to name this folder personal, whatever, and you're going to upload it some files. You can decide if you want to upload it personal messages, whatever. You can decide your personal data feeling on ChatGPT. But if you create that folder and you put a bunch of personal stuff in it, and then you go here and you copy this big block of code, and you can also copy the cool astrology one or whatever you want, and you paste it into that ChatGPT and you say, tell me about me, and you put this huge block of code, it's going to give you some really interesting stuff. And if it's good, email me. And if it's bad, tell me why. And it's fun. All right. That's my presentation for you. And Sarah's going to ask me some questions.
So I guess one of the first things that I have for you is, a lot of people complain that with AI, we lose kind of the human component to it. And was there anything when you were working with this system where you lost, a key aspect of who you are, or that you felt who you are, or someone who had an experience with that?
Well, I had a weirder feeling, like this concept of the humanity in AI, like I actually think about a lot. Yeah. And so, and I'll tell you what really bothers me, and it should bother all of us, is I think in many ways, when you have elaborate conversations with AI, I actually feel like I'm getting a more human response than I do with humans. And I'll tell you why that is. So if you take a conflict you've had, and let's just say that it's really easy to do this if it's in text, and you look at your behaviors in text and the conflicting parties' behaviors in text, and you upload that to AI, and you say, whatever, was I right? Was I wrong? Who was right? Who communicated better? I found the feedback that AI gives me on reflecting on my own communication style and behavior is better than my own reflection for sure, and from others, right? And I kind of ended up at this weird spot where I was like, I actually feel like I'm getting a more compassionate and thorough view on my human interaction through AI's lens than I am through humans. And I don't know how to feel about that. Like, I think it actually morally bothers me because I think of myself as a pretty in-depth emotional person. And I think I have like fairly sophisticated ways of thinking about emotion. And yet I'll find myself reflecting on certain communications through AI and thinking, my God, AI was actually more compassionate than I was, more sympathetic than I was, had a different level of morality than I do. And so I don't think it's about like losing your humanity by any means. I think there is a risk of losing agency and independent decision-making. But I actually think AI from a humanistic perspective can actually provide a more broad set of humanistic responses. But I would also note AI often is programmed to please us.
Yes.
But I would also argue most of the people in our lives are programmed the same way.
Now, do you think now working with AI, AI often, as you said, tells us what we want to hear. It's a digital form of virtue signaling. How do we build systems that challenge us with the truth rather than just giving us affirmation?
Well, I think what you're going to find is like, you can definitely, like, what's going to happen is you have some really big engines. You'll have OpenAI, you'll have Gemini, you're going to have Facebook's engine, you're going to have a bunch of big engines. And those engines are definitely going to be very broad at giving us kind of broad level information. But then you're going to find that there's going to be all these fractions. And these fractional engines are going to be very specific to specific doctrines or specific philosophies or a specific way of interacting. And I think that what you're going to find is there's going to be a series of psychology engines that get released. Some might be Freudian in nature. Some might be around other doctrines of psychology. And they'll actually be programmed not to tell you necessarily what you want, but actually to give you meaningful reflection on who you could be or your actions. And so although today I think that the engines are broad, I think that they become specialists in the end. Not for everything, but definitely for psychology and finance and medical and other those kind of like specific industries. So I think that that might be a problem today, but it's probably not a problem in the future.
Do you see these systems as being something that can complement traditional therapy or something that's just independent?
So I've talked to people now whose therapists use AI. And so what happens is they'll have a therapeutic session. The psychologist will record the entire session. They'll basically run the recording of the session through AI, generate notes and action items for the patient, probably generate notes and action items also for the therapist. And then they'll use those, and this might be therapists doing this, this also might be life coaches or psychologists, as to say people kind of in this like, psychological healing profession. But I'm definitely hearing about them using AI as a complement. I think the other risk, though, to note is in the certain sense of also losing agency, people become very over-reliant on AI for emotional support, which is probably also a danger component. When you find people that are consistently dialoguing with AI and they're kind of removing their own human interaction. And I think that people that use AI in addition to therapy could be risk of like too much. Like there's definitely something to be said of saying, okay, I'm going to prepare myself to see a therapist. It's once a week. It's a very confined time versus having 24/7 access to a therapist. But with that said, there's a bunch of people who I think lives are benefited by having 24/7 access to an AI therapist. So I think it can go both ways, whether basically AI kind of taints the traditional psychological perspective or whether it enhances it.
Wonderful. Now, your system encourages people to upload deeply personal information to ChatGPT. And with the financial incentive that exists on that platform to collect data, is there any ethical or privacy concerns on your part?
I mean, I think at this point, everybody should have ethical and privacy concerns over your data. Like we have another company we invested in that focuses on dark web data breaches and kind of getting consumers remediation if their data has been breached. And you would probably become fairly nauseous if you understood how much of your data is openly available for purchase on the dark web. I've generally taken the perspective that assuming I don't do things that would put me in jail and I get more benefit out of sharing data than I do out of the risk of sharing that data, I'm comfortable with the benefit of sharing that data. But I've been in technology for a long time and I'm very comfortable with the fact that like my data is going to go back to an engine. Just the same way my search history goes back to an engine, just the way that my private files are stored on cloud servers. Like I understand my own data hygiene, but I also recognize that these systems pose, potential risk if they're breached and where my personal data goes. And it's a bigger question. But I think everyone's have to find their own version of like how they want to exist in this world. I will generally say though, that a world of pure privacy I think is impossible if you want to interact within mainstream society. And so I suspect whether you like it or not, like you're probably contributing a lot of data back to different AI systems inadvertently.
Now, kind of on this topic, when ChatGPT was being used more normal, there was a lot of corporations who implemented different systems that would hopefully protect their data, but still allow their employees to use the productivity aspects of it. Do you believe that those platforms are any better at protecting data or a company's data than an open source model like ChatGPT?
Well, so, I mean, just to like kind of make it a simpler form, right? You can definitely run your own AI instance on your own computer. You could literally install it on your computer, disconnect the computer from the internet, have the computer never touch the internet for the rest of time. You could use it all the time for your own personal data analysis, and then you could just destroy the computer when you were done. So if you wanted a completely air-gapped, sanitized environment of an AI running on a computer that would never feed that data back, you absolutely can. And if you're a large financial institution or legal institution, you absolutely should be doing that. You should be running your own engine on your own local hardware, completely quarantined from the rest of the world to make sure your data is never breached, right? Most people won't do that though. But yes, you can. So if people are focused on that, it's not that hard to do. You can absolutely do it. It's probably worth it for some people that are concerned. And let me also note one other thing. So as much as ChatGPT and OpenAI have boundaries around illegal drug mixing or crime or psychology or whatever it's going to have, where it won't tell you the answers to certain things, those mainstream products will be, they will have a prophylactic around them for data. But the reality is, if you want to find your way to dark AI interaction where there's no boundaries on what you can talk about, you're just literally one click away. So it's kind of the same thing when we think about mental health. Like, yeah, if you go on the web and you search like how to build a bomb, we've done a lot to make sure that you can't find that diagram on the web.
Yes.
But you're really just one click away from a dark web experience where you absolutely can find that data. And so, when I think about mental health and making sure children are protected or people are protected against self-harm or crime, like, yeah, I want the major platforms will be held responsible and they will have to adhere to certain safety guidelines. But if that person wants to find the darkness, they will absolutely find the darkness, right? We're just going to make it hopefully a lot harder for them to find.
Now, with your children, there's a lot of parents who put restrictions around social media use and things of that nature. Do you think that people will start implementing restrictions on using AI, especially with the unfortunate situation that happened this past week?
First off is, even coming from the background of my space, like I will tell you that, Instagram and social is one of the reasons why we have a global mental health crisis. So it's like, this is a self-created problem through the way that we interact with social and the way it makes people feel, and especially a problem with children. So it's funny to think that AI is a technical solution to a self-created technical problem. But they are definitely interlinked. I do think, you are seeing a little bit of division with schools of saying, we do want kids using AI or we don't want kids using AI. At this point, similar to when the calculator was introduced or the computer or the web, AI is going to be a resource that we'll all probably have access to from here and in the future. And in my mind, being a very technically forward person, I think limiting somebody's ability to learn how to use those tools is handicapping them for the future. So as much as like, yeah, I'm not psyched about kids being on YouTube for 12 hours a day, and I'm not super excited about the eating disorders that come out of Instagram usage. And yeah, the phone is the most addictive thing on the planet next to heroin. I think that like, yeah, you should have restrictions around technology usage for kids. Absolutely. But out of that spectrum, if it was like, do I want my kid on Instagram, YouTube, or AI? I'd much rather have them talking to AI and learning versus just consuming absolute garbage through these other platforms.
Yeah. And there's also the positive aspects of social media and branding. There's a lot of people who've had opportunities that they wouldn't have otherwise.
Yeah.
And even with AI, there's so much productivity that it's really helped companies kind of get further than they would in a typical day.
Yeah. You can do things today in a matter of time that you've never done in the past with very, very low level of man hours. And for creatives that want to do creative expression through video or images or ideas, like there's never been a tool like this in the past, right? So we're seeing stuff happen in film where a writer can now create a film, right? Versus going from a writer to a producer to a team to a studio. So suddenly like creative expression through AI is completely remarkable. And it's going to change the entire way we think about entertainment and content and everything.
Yeah, and it also kind of removes a financial barrier as well. Like even I know a lot of creatives who have created their websites or apps using AI as an assist to that, where they need something a little bit greater than Squarespace or something of that nature.
That's right.
And it's, instead of spending $10,000 on doing that, they can spend a couple afternoons working on it and hopefully have something that's ready for production.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What's nice is, I think of a lot of ideas and I explore a lot of topics, and I'll tell you like my ability for an idea to come to some visual representation or some deck or some presentation or language wrapped around it, like it's never been faster than today. It's completely remarkable.
Absolutely. Your framework combines psychology, AI, and symbolic systems like astrology, human design, and gene keys. How do you navigate the tension between empirical data and mystical or symbolic interpretation? And what value does that synthesis provide users?
It's funny because I found that like a lot of people that over rely on AI for psychology also love mysticism because they're looking for like external reinforcements around, individual moments in their lives. And I think it's fun. And to be honest, like, I think the beauty of mysticism is it helps you feel the answer you want. So it's more about like questioning yourself. It's kind of like if you have a 50-50 decision and the moment you flip the coin, you actually know how you want that coin to land.
Yes.
And I think mysticism kind of helps you see that same framework. So I think it's more of like a realization framework around decision making and personality. But I actually separated these. So if you run my human architecture framework, you're not going to get a bunch of stuff around mysticism. If you happen, like I think I released the mysticism one as like a fun thing on a weekend, and so it's super fun and ridiculous and hilarious. And I wanted to challenge obviously the premise of what was correct and not, and that data set is interesting to work with. But I don't see them necessarily as combined. More that the mysticism is like a little bit more fun.
Now, do you think people could use this? I'm not sure actually when you created this, so that might be part of my question as well. But do you think people could use this when they're just starting the dating process and trying to wean out, what they're actually looking for?
I think that I'm sure if you uploaded all the data I'm talking about and then said, who's my perfect partner, you'd probably actually get a pretty interesting response. I haven't written that prompt yet. That'd be kind of fun to write. But I think more importantly, like if you had two people and you uploaded this code, this encoded result, and you said, how do we relate to each other? You're definitely going to learn some interesting things about each other. And so I think that's cool. And it's funny because over the years, I've done this in many other ways, but particularly in the business construct. So like I've been on executive teams where like the entire executive team took these elaborate WISC-based personality tests, and then they would come up with these diagrams of how we all related to each other and how we deal with problem-solving situations and who should work with who and who had. So I've seen this done in a lot of different ways. They're typically expensive, complicated, difficult to understand. Early days, I worked with eHarmony on their personality matching framework for their original dating product. There's been a lot of people trying to figure out this compatibility scoring system. This is just a simpler, more novel, easy way to kind of just do it. And similar to mysticism, you'll probably read into it what you want, which is like fun, but that's true for kind of everything. So I think it is interesting if you're at the beginning of a relationship and you choose to do this, like, tell me how it feels. Tell me if it's right. Tell me if it's wrong. And one thing to note that I have seen, and it's kind of with OpenAI in particular, if you upload substantial amounts of data, like thousands of pages of chat transcripts and such, it will lose fidelity on that data. So like OpenAI in particular has a fidelity issue, meaning like if you overload it with source material, it'll start like skipping stuff, misreading stuff, mistagging stuff. There's some more elaborate engines that like will actually do deep research, like Parallels is one where it like kind of tries not to miss anything. But, and this is getting better. So like if you upload all your data today, your results can be better than if you upload all your data previously. And if you ever want to test my prompt on that, what you basically say is, run this prompt for me, but then give me examples from the uploaded source files of every single result you come up with. Right. And then it'll be like, oh, here's your attachment style. And then it can give you 3 sentences of exactly in your writing or your communication of how it came to that conclusion. And a lot of times with AI, that's what I'm kind of asking more and more is saying, okay, I want to understand what you think about a problem, but I also want you to reference like why you came to that conclusion so I can track whether I believe your references. Right. And that's, I think, a more helpful way to use it.
It's also interesting as well because that's what they teach in school. You're supposed to find where your resources or where your references from. And if they don't have a reference, what are they actually building upon?
Right. So I think it's helpful. And AI generally has done a really good job, these engines, to abstract the references because they don't want copyright, lawsuits over like how they're coming to all these different conclusions because they've essentially siphoned the world knowledge into a brain. But for you can definitely ask it. And I think it's like helpful to kind of learn more about it.
Awesome. Is your system decodes human behavior into codes and patterns. How do you ensure that turning a person's life into data, you don't lose the richness, the nuance, and the unpredictability that makes us human?
Oh, well, I mean, maybe that's more future state, but I mean, certainly you're going to lose the richness and the fidelity of a human, like within that code. But the same way, if you looked at your medical report and you asked, does it completely summarize the way I value my body? It's probably not going to represent that same summary. So I think the same thing too. Like this is just one very basic, very novel way to initially look at yourself through the lens of AI, right? And maybe you'll learn something new. Maybe you won't. And then worst case, you've spent about 10 minutes of your life and learn nothing. But hopefully you spend 10 minutes and you like get some cool insights on yourself and maybe it makes us all be better humans.
Now, looking ahead, how do we ensure AI empowers us as opposed to the data exploitation, bias, and erosion of connection that we've seen through social media?
Well, I mean, okay, if we're talking about social media, right? Like
Yeah.
social media's eroding of ourselves is through like a comparison-based society of every time you opening the app wondering which of your friends has a more interesting and beautiful life than you, right? Which is the why most people feel like crap, because when they open their phones, they realize their life isn't as interesting as the celebrities they follow or the Lamborghinis they're infatuated with. And in a certain sense, when I talk to kids about this, my reference is like, you know, I grew up at this really small town in Oregon. And in the small town, there was this burger joint called the Giant Burger. And the Giant Burger served these like, you know, half-pound burgers. And in the back of the Giant Burger restaurant, this guy owned a DeLorean. And so the owner of the Giant Burger owned this DeLorean. And like growing up, I would go eat my burger and then walk around to the back of the Giant Burger and take a look at this super rad DeLorean. And I remember thinking to myself as a child, like, that must be the pinnacle of success. Owning a burger joint and a DeLorean. Like what more would you possibly want in life?
So this is your dream business.
This was my dream. Like, oh my God. Like, this must be the richest man in the state. Like, this is incredible, right? And then I look at a kid today, right? And they're like, oh, Kendall Jenner got her 4th Ferrari this week. You know, so-and-so is 10,000 times more beautiful than I am. Like, I can never afford the lifestyle. Like, when's my private jet ride? Right? And so I think like my growing up in the 80s, being like my framework for success was my local community, the people I interacted with, the places I went. And maybe every once in a while, Robin Leach's Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous television show would come on and I'd see some glimpse of Donald Trump's gold mansion in New York. And I'd be like, oh, it's crazy. But it felt so unapproachable. The problem on our social media product is when you go through that feed, it's your friend who's very approachable, next to somebody who's completely unapproachable, next to your friend who's very approachable. And so no matter what your takeaway is, like, how could I possibly get there, right? And that's a big reason why you basically have this degradation in our mental health. AI is not that experience. Like, AI hopefully will make you feel good. It might make you feel bad. I don't think AI's goal is to shove a lifestyle in front of you that you will never be able to achieve or your children will never be able to achieve. So AI definitely presents a whole different wave of problems, but I don't think the social media problem is connected to the AI problem from what it's making people feel.
What about AI creation though? There's a lot, we were talking about it earlier actually, just about, you know, the tools that creators have that they didn't have previously. And there's social media accounts who have millions of followers that are all AI generated.
Yeah.
In some ways, I could see that it's almost adding to the problem rather than taking away from it in some ways.
I mean, I think the digitization of photography and humans through, you know, Photoshop and, you know, manipulation tools, AI being the most recent one, has been a consistent elevation of the unapproachable standard of human beauty. So like, that's just a furthering, right? But yes, I would assume that within the next few years, the majority of kind of premium high velocity viral content you see through social will be 100% AI generated with 100% AI humans that may have beauty and physical standards that we're never going to approach. I'm only waiting for like the 3-breasted woman from Total Recall to show up on my Instagram feed as the completely unapproachable thing that some 14-year-old would be like, I'm really looking for her. And I'm like, good fucking luck, brother. Yeah, like, that's not going to happen. So like, that's coming for sure, right? Like, and it's going to be very confusing to be a child when you're seeing stuff that literally doesn't exist in humanity as a sexualized object through AI feeds. And if you take this idea and run with it, I'll be very disappointed in all of you. So do not create that Instagram account. Do not create that woman on Instagram. It's not good for society, but it is coming. And the kids of our kids will be very confused. And there'll be some pushback of, is it real if it's not? And there are certain countries now that are definitely putting labels on photo distorted, digitally enhanced photography in magazines and stuff to try to tell you that model shot you're looking at, that cover shoot, that advertisement was not just an original photography, but it was an actually digitally enhanced thing. But the reality is the images that we've been seeing from Hollywood, from media, have been digitally enhanced for a long time, right? AI is just the final blow of replacing the human. But these humans that we've been seeing through these things are not really human for quite a while.
we've talked a lot about how AI kind of takes the human out of things. Is there ways in which AI kind of loses the human element, and that's still going to be really important? Because I think there's a lot of concern about, the machines taking over, which is so unrealistic, but there is that kind of level of concern, and I wanted to see your opinion on that.
Well, I mean, I think that humanity is going to go through a whole bunch of lessons. Mm-hmm. I was really convinced 6 months ago that AI was going to create probably 7 to 10% unemployment across America. I'm actually not fully convinced of that now. There's a lot of unemployment coming. There's a lot of jobs that are about to be wiped out, but there's a lot of new jobs created, a lot of new jobs being created around AI, around data cleansing, around making sure AI does a good job, fact checking AI. There's a lot of jobs being created right now too. So there's a big shift happening, right? There's no doubt that AI will weave into every component of society, right? There's pretty much no doubt of it. Like I said, I think the biggest risk is people lose their own agency to make their own decisions, become so they're over-reliant on a voice in their head. And whether or not machines take over the planet, I mean, we can all turn to all of our sci-fi, view into that. Certainly AI is a evolution of technology that in certain ways is more human than human, and in certain ways is the complete pinnacle of human creation, and in certain ways could absolutely be the replacement for humanity. So there's a lot of different ways, that this could kind of go. And if you ever want to really freak yourself out, start, reading about the upcoming robot evolution and how many humanoid robots we expect to be walking around the planet in the next 10 years. And then combine that with the future of AI and imagine those two things merging. And you can definitely put yourself in some night sweats and go talk to AI about how you feel about it.
So kind of as a final point, what do you think is next? This is, our pillar of the design conference. What's next in terms of AI, especially with the human component or psychology aspect?
Well, I think the first piece is right now we're I've had a few different incredible moments in technology, right? And I think that I've kind of lived during one of the most interesting times, right? I grew up with floppy disk computers. I remember the sound of AOLs connecting to the internet. I worked on LimeWire on the original MP3 downloads. I remember the beginning of the web and how we started connecting these computers together. I was there for the introduction of the iPhone. I built apps. I saw the rise of social. Then we saw the beginning of crypto and all the magic behind blockchain, which is absolutely incredible. And now we're at this phase of AI, right? It's incredible. And I will tell you that through all those evolutions, I always felt behind. So when blockchain came, when the web came, it was every morning I woke up and I was like, oh my God, what happened in the last 24 hours? What happened in the last 24 hours? I will tell you what's happening now in AI in any 24-hour period is faster and more interesting than anything we've ever seen in technology in the history of man. Every day I wake up with people sending me things that I literally can't believe exist. And it's tools every day. And what's amazing is they're available to everyone here. They're easy to use. They're available to you. And anyone that's not waking up every day and playing with these tools is going to just be left behind. This is absolutely happening, and it's happening super fast. And I really can't imagine spending time on anything but this. That's how incredible this moment of time is, right? And your kids need to be on these tools. This is the future. Pushing back on this, good fucking luck. This is a tidal wave coming. It's changing the way all of us are going to interact, build, do business, earn money, manage everything. And so I wake up every day with my mind blown of what I've seen. And through all the previous technical revolutions I've seen, I've never seen anything at this velocity. So I highly recommend you lean into it.
That's amazing. It's also really interesting because at the time that AI was starting to take off for me, I was in 2 separate degrees. I was in a finance degree and a computer science degree. And my finance professors were extremely against me using AI for anything. And then my computer science professors were saying, absolutely, you need to make sure that you know about this and beyond just building, how to use it in your everyday life. So I hope that within education, they're able to kind of add that into every different discipline and show people at least, the benefits and limitations of that, similarly to kind of what they did with social media back then too.
Agreed. And similar to the introduction of computers and similar to the introduction of the calculator and the phone. I mean, any technical revolution has people that push back on it, but we're definitely here. It's definitely coming. your kids need to know these tools. You need to know these tools.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. And
thank you, guys.
We're going to have a little Q&A at Aspen Collective Gallery afterwards if anyone wants to ask Mike some questions.
Cool. I'll see you guys there.